Good evening. I wanted to talk to you folks about the Yucca Man. Now, the Yucca Man is a story of a upright hominid species, appears to be about 7 to 8 feet tall, which you would describe as your classic Bigfoot. Now, sightings of this across the United States are not uncommon. Bigfoots are seen all over the place, and as we've discussed on this channel, there's different varieties, types, behaviors. But what makes the Yucca Man story so odd is one of the hottest regions in the Southwest, out by 29 Palms, out in the low desert off the 10 freeway near Palm Springs. Uh, this area out here, just past Big Bear in the Idlewild Mountain Range, and that's important, and we'll get to that later. But lots of reportings over the years of a blondish, more slightly built, um, still very tall, built more like a basketball player than like a linebacker style Bigfoot that's been seen wandering the deserts, looking in cars at nights, harassing campers. And around the 29 Palms military base, there's a huge history there, especially through the 70s and 80s, of base guards seeing these things, of them sneaking into the base, getting past fences where they really shouldn't have been able to get past, and soldiers walking back to the barracks, and just in general, a lot of soldiers encountering these things. And why that is, there's much speculation. Uh, Primarily seen at night, because if you're any kind of a big critter like most desert stuff, you're probably going to lay low, find a cave or a tree or a tunnel or something to hide in, something that's going to insulate you from the heat, and you're going to come out at night because that's when all the other animals are to hunt and find water and everything else. So it's just really interesting how 29 Palms, base guards, front guards, they'd see this thing running around out there, they'd catch it on camera. There's a lot of stories of this, especially in the 70s and 80s before Bigfoot was really, in the term of popular culture. So they called it the Yucca Man because it was often seen running from tree to tree, hiding behind yuccas. Uh, like they would in a pine forest, hiding behind pine trees. There's all sorts of stories. If you go into BFRO website and you look up California, then Riverside County, there's a few stories of the Yucca Man in there, and some of the desert sightings. Pretty fascinating. If you Google it, there's a lot more of these encounters and some of the history. So that was just to give you kind of an intro to the Yucca Man. So when it comes to photographic evidence of the Yucca Man, a desert Bigfoot, this is going to be very hard to find pictures of. There's a couple images that are supposedly this one here. It looks like on some rocks coming down of a figure leaping. The arms do look a little long, but because that's always the first thing I look for is proportions. But this is supposed to be the only known picture of the Yucca Man. I found it on the internet. I don't know any history about this picture. It looks old. It looks like it's actual film and not a digital image. It's pretty interesting. It looks like you can see a picture running from rock to rock. It definitely almost looks like snow there, but it looks like which parts of the desert going up in the mountains, the more high desert regions do get snow. And here's another image. This one's a little more famous. I used it on another video where I kind of talked a lot about this subject as well, my desert Sasquatch video. And this one is odd because it does have a very Bigfoot-like appearance with no neck and broad shoulders and very hairy, but it almost has a certain wispy spirit-like look to it as well, and just a certain blur to it, like especially its left arm, as you can see there, looks like it's kind of fading in and out. I don't know much about this photograph either, but it's certainly very intriguing. It looks like some guys encountered it at night. Now, the Yucca Man, and in certain areas of the desert regions out there, uh, you can see, there's a statue here by the hiking trail in certain areas. It's kind of been a big lore. Now, one of the theories that I have is that these things tend to migrate and probably move around. I doubt in the middle of August, in the hottest part of the year, in the middle of the day, these things would be caught anywhere near out in the open. But if they could find caves and other things to hide in, I think they could do pretty well nocturnally. Now, one of the things that's always interesting to me about the description of the Yucca Man is it seems to be a Bigfoot-like creature. I think it's an offshoot of a Type 1 creature, but a lot more slender. Like I said, built more like a basketball player than a football player. Generally described as lighter hair. Now, if it's naturally lighter hair or just because spending time in the sun, your hair is going to lighten up. But generally a little more slender, a little more gray shell build, supposed to be very fast moving, but a lot of hair too, and that might seem counterintuitive, hair in the desert, but it probably does a lot to insulate them from the heat, and does a lot of the same things why you see people cover up in the desert. Now here you see a picture of the Big Bear Mountain Range, and this is important because from the 10 freeway out by the palm trees and the casinos and the open badlands of the desert down there, you can see two big mountain ranges, the Idlewild Mountain Range and the Big Bear Mountain Range. And I think that's important because both those mountain ranges have long histories of Bigfoot sightings. And I think maybe offshoot clans or some of the more foothills in the wintertime, they probably come down to the desert area where it's warmer because it does get a lot of snow and it does get very cold. And then I think other times of year they move up and down. As far as in the desert, as far as food, I've spent a lot of time in the desert, more so in the high desert than in the low desert, but I have been in the low desert quite a lot. And the thing that strikes you is really when you're out there in the middle of the day how desolate it is. But if you go early in the morning or at night or even in springtime when the weather's cooler or in the wintertime, but typically in spring, you're surprised by how much life is out there, how many birds, how many lizards, how many frogs, how many turtles, how many different types of rodents you see. And especially a desert tortoise would be really easy pickings for a Bigfoot. It could probably just pry the shell right off. The other thing that is a little bit surprising is when you get into larger food sources like the tortoise I just showed, but when you also get into like deer-sized game and coyote-sized game and a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's pretty fascinating to me that there's a lot more life out there than you would think, and foxes and bobcats and everything else. So what makes a desert is a lack of water, kind of like the Gobi Desert and other deserts are very cold. So to me, the number one priority would be water and moisture, and I think it would, if I was a large hominid species, I would be very interested in all the plants and cactuses and succulents out there. And besides water, also salt and nutrients and the nectar and what types of plants and everything else you can eat. Prickly pear is really good and really can save your life out in the desert for the vitamins and nutrients. Plus, you got to remember in Palm Springs, there's hot springs and cold springs out there. Water that comes out of there are oases. And with humans out there now, there's going to be all sorts of extra wells and pools and ponds and sprinklers and other things that I think these things would get water. So as humans have developed there, I think they even just stand even more of a chance, probably more of a chance of getting sighted. But like I said, I think they would stick around at night mostly. But they got to know where every water hole is and seasonal flash floods and streams and the vegetation that it brings with it. I think that would be very important. Like I said, in the hottest, driest parts of the month, I mean, we're talking May to probably mid-October. They're probably not in the lowest, hottest part of the desert. They're probably moving up into the hills. They're probably purely nocturnal by that point. It's just the only way that makes sense, because if you've ever been out in the desert in the hottest part of the year, even in the high deserts where I've been, you go out there in 110 degree heat in the middle of the day, there's nothing. And that's because stuff dies in that kind of heat. Now, the other part that I thought was fascinating is over the years, a lot of campers have reported stuff. They've seen something moving through the campground in the middle of the night. They've had stuff stolen out of coolers and food missing. And if people leave water out or they have dogs water when they're camping. So campers have had quite a bit over the years. And as we know, this isn't new to Bigfoot behavior. This has been a very classic thing over the years, because when you camp, you're pretty much camping in their turf and in their area. And I think they would also see campgrounds as a very opportunistic place to steal water, to steal, I wouldn't be surprised if they knew what a soda can was, squeezed it, and out come this sweet liquid. They're very smart, and I'm sure they watch humans all the time eat and drink and see where stuff is stashed, and I'm sure they have a good sense of smell. So this isn't new Bigfoot behavior at all, but it's pretty interesting that people who camp out there and the snowbirds and all the people do report seeing them over the years. Although I must say in the last 10 or 15, 20 years, going back to the 90s, the Yucca Man reports are way down. This seems to be primarily like a 70s and 80s type thing. A lot of reports then, even going back to the early 60s, with the base and everything out there. And I just think maybe that's because the population's exploded and expanded so much in recent history, and all the campers and explorers and people running their dirt bikes and ATVs and all the stuff that they do out in the desert, if that's just a proliferation. Or I also think that maybe if they were snooping around a military base long enough in the middle of nowhere, the military was going to send armed guards or special forces or something out to investigate and possibly eliminate these creatures. So very well they could have died out from natural causes. They moved further back in the more uninhabited regions. They went really nocturnal. There's a lot of things that could have happened. Like I said, the government, like we've heard in a lot of other stories, maybe could have killed them off or shot them, or it could have just been one lone Bigfoot that got exiled out to the desert that possibly was known for all these Yucca Man sightings and eventually just died of old age or of thirst or had a drought winter or something like that. But anyway, I think it's very fascinating. All over the Southwest, if you look in Arizona and parts of Nevada and Mexico, places you would not expect, mountains, but mountains in a really hot desert, people see these things. And I think they're a lot hardier. I think they maybe migrate and move around a lot more than you think. And, there may be something else to it that I'm missing, maybe a more extreme example or a more paranormal reason why these things are seen out in those areas. So if you've liked what you've seen here today, folks, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me out. If you have any stories or anything you'd like to add, or feel free to leave a comment. Let's keep them positive. Let's keep them constructive. And also, if you could, and you feel I deserve it, please hit the subscribe button. We have videos coming out. I do 2 to 3 videos a week. Sometimes Mondays and Thursdays seems to be the typical schedule, and sometimes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 videos a week seems to be the schedule. It just depends on how much time and how much material and everything else that's going on. So thank you very much, folks. Please stay safe in the woods and the desert, and thanks very much for watching.